The Trump administration's America First approach to foreign policy has long led many on the left to accuse it of fueling a new isolationist strain in American politics, even during President Trump's first term. And while this characterization is off the mark, it is something to be on guard against, because the U.S. does have a role and a responsibility on the world stage. And there are some speaking into this president and this administration that think America should just not be involved anywhere, and that we should only care for ourselves. And America first does not mean America only. And among America's obligations should be the defense of what our nation's founders identified as the first freedom, the freedom of religion. In particular, that we should, as a nation founded on Christian principles and biblical truth, we should advocate for Christians around the globe when they are persecuted by tyrants and terrorists. Joining me now to discuss this is Dr. Albert Mohler, president of the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary, and the host of The Briefing. He's also the editor of World Opinions and the author of many, many books, including Prophet, Priest, and King, which actually comes out next month. Dr. Mohler, welcome back to Washington Watch. Good to see you again.
As always, great to be with you, Tony.
I want to jump into this because I want, as believers, I want them to understand our role and responsibility. Number one, as believers, but number two, as American believers. But before we do that, breaking news today out of the United States Supreme Court, the Supreme Court announcing that it is going to take a case from Colorado to decide whether states and local governments can enforce laws that actually prohibit therapy, counseling for children, LGBTQ children. So essentially, this started, I think, in California, the first state. Now, about half the states in the nation have these prohibitions where even if a parent wants their child to get counseling for gender dysphoria, it's against the law.
Right. You know, this is going all the way back to the revolutionary origins of the LGBTQ movement, and in particular, the idea that they want to think that any opposition is, first of all, described as something they would dismiss as homophobia, or secondly, is rooted in hate and thus needs to be expunged and can be legally limited. And so we have seen this in state after state. And, you know, Tony, you set this up exactly right. Here you have a law that says that even if parents, even if the teenager herself or himself wants Christian-based therapy based upon a biblical understanding, that would be forbidden. And so you have the medical health industry hijacked on behalf of the LGBTQ revolution. Something that, by the way, you and I both know went back to two meetings in the early 1970s when, for instance, the American Psychiatric Association one day believed that homosexuality was a mental disorder and the next day said that it was not. That's not exactly what I would call science.
Well, and they don't even want to talk about it. They can't defend the position, so we can't right. have studies, we can't debate it, and now we can't have Christian counselors or secular counselors help people work through the issues, which we know actually works. Now, I find it very interesting, Dr. Mohler, that we have half the states that have a prohibition against counseling for gender dysphoria, and then we have another half of the states which have outlawed the experimental use of drugs and surgeries for minors that have gender dysphoria. So it's just very interesting. I think such a picture of a divided nation where ideologically you have one that won't even let you have conversational therapy about this confusion that is going on within you, but they want to be able to do irreversible surgeries and drug treatments. It's amazing.
Well, and the red and blue America divide shows up on this very issue. I mean, you rightly mentioned the division between the states, and you can pretty much map that by color on the electoral map. And that shows you that it really does matter, in a state-by-state basis, who is representing which worldview. And it shows you that clash of worldviews is there in every single issue and in every single election. And so, you and I both know it's not accidental that red and blue America map out this way. And by the way, it's leading to a very interesting phenomenon where you have people moving from red to blue and blue to
Yeah,
red based
yeah.
upon these very issues.
Yeah, and this is where I think this is headed, Dr. Mohler. I think you're going to have tax policies that will be reflective of this. I think you're going to have states that embrace life, a biblical view of life, a biblical view of human sexuality, a biblical view of family, a biblical view of private property, i.e., taxation, and they're going to prosper. And it's going to be attractive to others, but there's going to be a temptation to modify those laws based upon the migration of those leaving those blue states. So it's something we've got to constantly be aware of.
Yeah, in Texas right now, they're bragging about, and justifiably so, the movement of companies such as Tesla and others moving vast production facilities to places like Austin, Texas. But Austin's become a deep blue dot in a very red state. And the way that voting patterns work, this is something you're going to have to worry about. As one put it, they're moving from California and bringing their voting patterns with them. That's not good news.
No. And we kind of experienced a reverse of that in my home state of Louisiana back when Katrina kind of moved a lot of New Orleans out and dispersed them across the country. Yeah. They used to control every statewide election, but not anymore. And Louisiana is challenging Oklahoma, I think, as one of the reddest states. All right, let's get to foreign policy issues, Dr. Mohler, because I really want to get your thoughts on this, because I think Christians need to work through this, because there is this isolationist view that I think is coming into the conservative movement through the libertarian push that is coming within the conservative movement. And let me just be very clear at the out front, not for you, you know this. Christian and conservative are not the same. Libertarian and conservative are not the same. Much different worldviews. But as Christians, number one, do we have an obligation to advocate for, speak up for our persecuted brothers and sisters? And then second to that, Dr. Mohler, as Christians living in America that have the resources to do something, should we?
Well, you lay that out in such a way, yes, I think clearly. It's a pre-political obligation for Christians to contend for Christians and to work for the safety of Christians in other parts of the world suffering persecution. We don't have to look to a contemporary authority for that. We have the book of Acts. We have the New Testament. So you make that first point just exceedingly well. We've got to contend for not just the freedom of religion. We have to contend for the lives and liberties of our Christian brothers and sisters, wherever they may be found all over the world. And persecution in the 21st century is as real as persecution, in the first century, as reflected in the New Testament. And the United States has a particular burden on this. For one thing, we're one of the few forces of good in the world that can make a difference speaking into these issues. And this is where the United States has made the issue of protecting religious liberty a criterion for its relationship with foreign nations. And we must continue to do that.
Now, and those are, as you pointed out, those are kind of two related but separate things. Number one, I do believe in God. I think we saw this in the Garden of Eden. He is about people having choices. He's not forcing himself on anyone. Freedom of religion is a hallmark. It is a defining element of America, and it's something in the previous Trump administration. It was their number one foreign policy under Secretary Pompeo. But as Christians, it goes a step further. We shouldn't hesitate to advocate for Christians who, by the way, happen to be the most targeted, persecuted group around the world. And so to differentiate between Christians and others should not be a hesitation coming from Christians.
Well, absolutely. Again, I think that's a New Testament mandate. And I think we not only pray for our brothers and sisters suffering persecution, but we're called to do whatever we can to try to prevent and alleviate that persecution. And Tony, I think we need to be honest. In the last 100 years, the main energies behind the persecution of Christians have been, number one, communism and communist regimes, such as continues to be fully represented in North Korea and China, and then Islam. Islamic-dominated nations tend to be extremely, extremely dangerous for Christian witness.
If I'm not mistaken, was it when Paul commended, I think it was the Thessalonians for actually taking up money to help the other church members that were being persecuted. So, I mean, it is actually not just praying, but it's actually giving of our means to help others who are suffering as a result of the persecution, like we see happening just over this weekend in Syria. I was last week in Israel. I mentioned this early in the program. I met with the Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu. He brought this issue up. He said the Christians are being persecuted. They're being targeted by HTS in Syria. We're doing what we can to try and protect them. I mean, we should be applauding that, and we should be helping them in doing that.
As a matter of fact, yes, absolutely. And I think we should also make it an issue of conditionality for American support and American aid. And furthermore, a matter of threat for American action in terms of holding regimes accountable for their treatment of Christians all over the world. And so, yeah, you're absolutely right. Christians shouldn't be reluctant, especially Christians in the United States, to speak out and call our government to be an agent for the protection of believers around the world.
You know, I actually think when you look back, that has been a part of the leverage that the United States has used to protect Christians under the Assad regime. I mean, he was a bad dictator, but he pretty much left the Christians alone because he knew that was a red line for the United States. We saw this with some of the other regimes in the Middle East, the same thing. My concern, and I'm going to ask you this, I'm honestly asking you this question, I'm not making a statement here. There is this movement that I made, that I referenced earlier, of this isolationism that does not see any reason for America to be involved, that we need to protect our own treasure, we need to protect our own everything we have. And while the president has clearly articulated a concern for the persecution of Christians, I am concerned. I personally am concerned about some who are speaking into this administration about trying not to be involved internationally, even if it comes down to a red line of Christian persecution.
You know, Tony, you're absolutely right. And I think I would be in the front line of arguing that the neoliberal interventionism that had so possessed the United States over the course of the last 40 or 50 years, it has proved itself to be unworkable. Our massive investments of blood and treasure all over the world in causes that we declared won only to have them lost again are a grave warning against believing that we can just make our will wherever we want it around the world. But you are very, very right to point to the fact that the opposite of that, or the corrective of that, is not total withdrawal from the world scene, as if that could happen. You know, the old Marxist statement, you may not be interested in history, but history is interested in you. There's no way for the United States to withdraw totally from intervening in situations all over the world. And, you know, even the people who say that will call for intervention in another situation the day after they make the first statement. And it's because it is impossible for the United States to fail to intervene where it wills to intervene. I think the argument is, where should we seek the U.S. to direct its attention and intervention? And the persecution of believers around the world is a place where we need to be, you know, right there in the front ranks.
Yeah, I describe myself as a rational isolationist. I don't want to get involved in other people's business unless I absolutely have to, but there are certain red lines. And involvement does not mean military. I'm not a military veteran. I was in the Marine Corps. I don't believe we should be sending our troops everywhere. But as you pointed out, there are other means. There's sanctions. There's just there's isolating these people from the world community by doing this. But we need to make clear. And I thought Ronald Reagan was pretty good at doing this when he was president, and Donald Trump as well. But I do think that we need to have a clear set of principles that would say there are certain things we will not tolerate, and the persecution of believers is one of them. Final word.
And we need to have a list of the good guys and the bad guys. And, you know, the U.S. State Department really has that responsibility. It even comes down to a special ambassador post for international religious freedom, and a commission that has full status in the United States government charged with that responsibility. And, you know, the list of the nice nations and the naughty nations ought to be more than just a matter of publicity. It ought to be a matter of guiding foreign policy.
It absolutely should. And we're going to have to leave it there. Dr. Al Mohler, always great to see you.